Hi all, let's have another wonderful aesthetic experience, this time with Paul Morphy looking at 8 of his greatest, most celebrated games, often featuring amazing sacrifices. Some of these are not really sacrifices in the purest sense of the word, because a sacrifice usually, a pure sacrifice is one which is not guaranteed, for example, for a material gain or checkmate. So some of these are from very, very strong positions, and the game is quickly decided after the sacrifice is made, often leading actually to an immediate mate. The most classic of all time for Paul Morphy, and every chess player should know this game, is the opera game. So Paul Morphy was playing Duke Karl and Count Isouard in Paris 1858. And he wanted, I think, to finish this game quite quickly, and this might help explain some of his decisions. He pinned their knight. b5 was now played, trying to relieve the pressure in the black position. Now Paul actually now played knight takes b5, hoping, I guess, that they wouldn't try and prolong the game with queen b4 check. And thankfully for him, they didn't. They played c takes b5, after bishop takes b5 check, knight bd7. We have a great position with great pressure now on d7, and the pressure is exerted even more with castling queenside. Now they played rook d8, and we see here now the black position collapsing. Rook takes d7, an exchange sacrifice. Rook takes d7, and the idea is to mobilize quickly the other rook to put pressure on d7 again. Now they try to trade queens. Here, Morphy spots a brilliant little finishing combination. Bishop takes d7 check, and after knight takes d7, I hope you all know the next move. If you've never seen this game before, I'll give you 10 seconds here, or you might want to pause the video. So white to play and win. What do you think Paul Morphy played here? I hope you've seen it. A very, very clear-cut sacrifice. With queen b8, it actually immediately leads to a checkmate. After knight takes b8, we have this beautiful position here, rook d8. A highly celebrated game, a big cultural reference, and this position is very, very famous. I think that's one of the most famous Morphy sacrifices. Now let's go on to a game against Anderssen, one of his closest peers, relatively speaking. So we have this position, very sharp position in the middle game, and now Paul Morphy had played d3, inviting knight g3, and maybe Adolf Anderssen playing black expected the rook to move, but Paul Morphy instead played bishop takes f4. And you might think, why doesn't black, instead of taking the rook or throw in a check? Actually, throwing in a check is arguably the best move, but not for the reason you might think. After bishop e2, not to actually take the rook here. This would actually lead to quite a good advantage for white with bishop g5, gaining a tempo on that queen and gaining access to this critical f6 square. For example, queen e6, knight f6. And now actually black is in quite deep trouble in this position, with the king coming out, c4, and there's huge threats. So this is not the way to play it with black. Actually, the check is good, but not for that reason. The best here is actually just rook g8, and in fact black might be slightly better now in this position after, say, taking rook takes g4. But Adolf Anderssen, he actually took the rook on h1. And we see now queen e7 check, sorry, queen e2 check, queen e7, knight f6 check, king d8, and the point is revealed now that white can actually forcibly win the queen. Can you see how? If I give you 10 seconds here. Okay, bishop takes c7 check, a nice forcing move, bringing the king out for this nice fork knight d5 check, winning the queen. The game actually carried on for quite a bit actually, but because actually technically black is even potentially slightly better from an engine perspective, but it is more difficult to coordinate the black pieces. It does require accuracy, so it required some inaccuracies from black actually to for white to get the advantage again. And it was in this position that knight a6 was another inaccurate move here actually. If black had played knight g3, there might have been a much bigger fight, and you know, maybe a draw or even a black win potentially. But with knight a6, we now see queen h5, bishop drop back, and now a very strong move which to gain the advantage is rook e1, as well as the move played which gains also an advantage, queen, just the queen taking on h1 here. So it doesn't matter about the bishop g5 check. That wasn't actually played. Black actually played an inferior move, but white is now significantly better anyway. Black played bishop takes b2, and this allowed a very important check here. So king d7, rook b1, and you see now why that queen h4 check is very important, because here, after bishop takes a3, queen a4 check is there to scoop up the bishop. So that's quite an important game culturally. It was actually a casual game, not actually in a tournament. It was in Paris 1858. Quite well celebrated. Here's another game against Adolf Anderssen now. And you know, black is faced with this e-file pressure. The bishop's a bit blocked by its own pawn. We see now Paul Morphy playing rook 1 e3. Black should now be on danger alert and play a move like king g7. That would actually be still slightly better for white, but it's not fatal just yet. In the game, Adolf Anderssen, he blundered actually with rook g8. Can you see what Paul Morphy played here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, a very, very important forcing move. It's important in chess to check out all the forcing moves. Rook takes e6, and this means now that actually black resigned, because he knows now that, of course, f takes. There's rook f3, skewering the queen against the king. So king safety is very, very important in chess, and these forcing moves really can expose king safety issues. Let's now have a look at the game Louis Paulsen against Paul Morphy. This is a highly celebrated game as well. Paul Morphy actually controls the centre really well. He's got this really dangerous bishop on b6. He's got double pawns, but it doesn't really matter here compared to black's domination of the position. Look at this poor bishop on c1. We see now black dominating the central file with rook e8, and white tries to exchange off queens. Like many of Paul Morphy's opponents, they want to try and get the queens off to improve their king safety, but far from improving the king safety. Can you guess what Paul Morphy played here? I expect most of you might have seen this combination before. So black to play. Okay, your last chance if you want to pause the video and work it out. Paul Morphy himself, usually a very, very quick player, apparently spent about 12 minutes on this move to check this combination. He played actually queen takes f3, and it opens that g line for the attack here after g takes, rook g6 check, king h1. But now a little quiet move, which is often difficult to calculate when you're material down, to look for quiet moves. Bishop h3 keeps all the pressure on. Now, you know, if a routine move like rook g1, you know, there's a back row issue. Rook takes g1, rook e1 check, and actually white's getting mated. That bishop is pretty deadly. So white actually played rook d1. What else is there? Black is actually doing very, very well in this position. There's not too many good choices. So rook d1 was played, and we see bishop g2 check. Bishop takes f3 check, and the king now has to go to f1. Now the rook comes, rook coming down to the 7th is quite a powerful move here. But first, actually, we see instead actually bishop g2 check, bishop h3 check. After king h1, a different solution to this position. Black actually now played bishop takes f2. So threatening bishop g2 mating. White now is absolutely forced to give up the queen to prolong the game with queen f1. And here black is better after bishop takes and rook e2. This is absolutely great for black. After rook h6, the rooks are now finding coordination on h2. So after bishop e3 here, actually, this last clever move, white resigned, because if bishop takes e3, for example, then we've got a mate in 2 here. Now the clinical engines, which are much better than any human will ever be at tactics, actually find a more optimal combination in this game position. I was about to say rook to the 7th. Rook to the 7th is actually a forced mate in 4, believe it or not. Absolute like mate in 3 now, whatever white plays. For example, well, on f2 here, so f2's dropping next move. If queen c4, rook takes f2 check, king g1. Now rook g2 is a double check, and it's absolutely decisive here, this bishop like this, because if now king f1, then rook g1 is mate, and if king h1, then again actually well, here there's a number of mates in 1 you can pick from. There's about 10 different mates in 1. So rook g1 is one of them. We've got this double check and it's mate. So a little bit of an inaccurate follow-up there, but the initial sacrifice is the one that really guarantees black a big advantage. This queen takes f3. A much celebrated game against Louis Paulsen. Now let's go to London in 1858 against Henry Bird. It's called The Disputed Immortal. There's great analysis video on the channel actually in depth for this. We see in this position, we see rook takes f2, a rook sacrifice. Now technically in this position actually better, apparently black's doing very well here, technically better might be bishop b4 or bishop d7 or queen h4, keeping the pressure on white. For example, if white went for that g file, bishop b4, and just black stands a lot better in this position. There's nothing to worry really on the g file. But no, rook takes f2 though, finds a way to break resources to white's king position, to get resources around white's king. Great resources like the queen. Often you do want them near to the opponent's king. And in terms of finishing the games off quickly, if this happens, you're going to often finish the game off quickly. And actually, there's a fantastic move now after bishop takes f2 to follow this up. Well, the only move really to keep the pressure on white. Can you guess what what black played in this position? So Paul Morphy playing black, he just sacrificed the rook to open up that third rank for the queen. Okay. He played actually queen a3. Now technically this position is actually equal at a certain depth, but it's amazing. Engines can point this out at say c3, then it might actually be equal. But this position, c3 was indeed played, so it is one of the best moves to start off with. Queen takes a2. Now black is threatening a mate in 2 with queen check, and then rook takes b2. So white parries this here in this position with the move b4, and we see check, king c2, queen a4 check, and here the engine indicates that it should be equal with king c1 to be stubborn with king c1. Instead, white played king b2, and this does help justify this earlier rook sacrifice and the queen coming over to be next to the king, because now black can smash open the lines with another sacrifice. Bishop takes b4. After takes, rook takes b4 check. White now giving up his queen, but it's not very nice, this position, because now very strong e3 is played, opening up the bishop on this diagonal. Bishop takes, bishop f5, rook d3, check, king d2, check, king d1, and queen b1 check is now winning more material, potentially this rook over here. If king d2, we just take the rook. So white actually resigned off this check. If bishop c1, then we can just take the rook here, and black is doing fantastically well. So it was a bit of a disputed immortal. Loads of analysis and arguments about this sacrifice, if Morphy should have played the more positional move. But brevity, his games have a brevity to them, and often, the choices, a bit like Mikhail Tal. Mikhail Tal might not have played objectively the best sacrifices, and neither did Morphy, but for different reasons. He was able to finish opponents off quickly, able to produce much more brilliant games than maybe more sounder theoretical continuations would have provided. Let's have a look at a game in New Orleans against Charles Le Carpentier, 1849. Now this was an odds game. White had his rook removed at the start of the game, and Paul Morphy played rook e1. Now d takes e5. Now believe it or not, after d takes e5, technically, actually, I think Morphy was 13 at the age. He was age 13 at the time of this game, and he may have missed a more simple continuation here, because white actually is doing quite well technically. But first I'm going to show you the game continuation. The game continuation played was knight takes e5, and it might seem a bit ludicrous, to have the queens exchanged off. So black actually did play queen takes d1, because you don't want to simplify much. But the point wasn't to simplify, the point was to play bishop takes f7 check here. And thankfully for Paul Morphy, the move king e7 was played, and this leads to a beautiful, very, very beautiful finish actually. Knight g6, double check. The power of the double check is demonstrated. The king takes, and now we have this final knight takes h8, and it happens to be mate. All the squares are taken up. This is checkmate. But technically, if black had actually played in this position king d8, then it might have been a different story here. Rook takes d1 check. It's not clear anymore. In fact, black does seem to be winning this position. This is a crucially different position. For example, like this, black's doing okay. But let's be fair on Paul. He did play a rook odds game. Okay, a slight inaccuracy there, but his finish here was absolutely beautiful. The beauty wouldn't have been there with the more correct continuation, and I'll show you that now. Is actually bishop takes f7 check, and actually white's doing very well. So for example, if king e7, queen b3, and the threat now is knight takes e5 just to open up the king, and it seems very, very difficult for black to defend this. If queen d6, for example, bishop takes e5, knight takes, and now the threat is knight g6, what does black do? In fact, black is in big trouble here. He's going to be losing his queen, for example, in this line. So that continuation, actually, bishop takes f7, is very dangerous. And if king takes f7, then we have knight takes e5, trying to lure the knight away from defending the queen. And this would be better for white. If the king moves here, say to f6, then that's a disaster. Knight takes c6 check, and then we're winning the queen after, for example. If king e6 or king e8, if king e8, then either knight takes c6 or even stronger, queen h5 check here. Knight takes g6 check, and this is just a total disaster for black. This sort of thing with queen g4 here being crushing, rook d6 check, and total disaster. So it's interesting that Paul he found a beautiful continuation though, and he was very, very young, and it was a fantastic odds game, remarkable rook odds game. Now let's go to Paris 1859, 10 years later, against Schufer, pardon me. So black in this position had played king c8, which was unfortunate. If black had played king e8, then apparently, technically, this is about equal. If knight takes c7 check, as long as black doesn't play king f8, then going into a mate in 2, black actually seems to technically be okay after king d8. So white has to continue the checks. If white doesn't continue the checks here, say bishop f4, then technically black might be crawling out here, either or trying to just secure a draw of king e8, or even playing king d7 is possible. Now it's just not entirely clear. This h5 actually gets that h6 square, very importantly, away from white. So thankfully for Paul Morphy, his opponent played king c8, and we see now knight c5 check. And now if king d8, we mate on d7, and in the game we see king b8, knight d7 check, knight b6 double check. And that's a beautiful thing about Paul Morphy games, these double checks and their importance. King b8, and I hope you can see the final sacrifice in inverted commas. If I gave you 10 seconds here, what would you play with white starting from now? Okay, queen c8, it's a beautiful smothered mate. Rook takes c8, knight d7, checkmate. Okay, let's go to a game played, I think, in New York. 1857. Now, Paul Morphy's doing fantastically well here. He's actually got an absolutely winning position already. It's just a nice finish, really. It's not really a sacrifice as such. Black can actually win this position in many ways. He plays knight cd4. The queen actually unfortunately goes to e4. This might not actually be the best move, but it's a terrible position in any case. And as I say, it's not really a sacrifice at all, really, this next move. It's just the best move, which kind of quickly decides the game. But it's the final position. If the final position was a photo of a chess position, it has some amusement to it. I think that's the important point about why this game is so celebrated. As chess enthusiasts, these beautiful positions, we can celebrate them, not just the entire game, as though they're a very interesting photography item. So knight g3, and the beautiful thing here is that white took on g6. There's not much else for white to do, really. It's a pretty lost position. but we get this nice little finish, knight d e2 check. I think actually it's not really the combination that may have been that important. It's the whole play before it as well. But it's the final position is quite a beauty, with the two knights kind of checkmating the king here. So that's the aesthetic impression is quite powerful there. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little tour of 8 quite famous Morphy sacrifices in inverted commas, or just great little finishes. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.